Power and strength to the Lord of Lords.
I'll be reading from 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 7. 1 second, please. Okay. Wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they, without a word, may be won by the conduct of their wives. When they observe your chaste conduct, accompanied by fear, do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. As Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered.
Good evening. If you are visiting with us, or if you haven't been able to participate in our Bible class, our Sunday morning and Wednesday night Bible class here at Roan Ridge, we have been going through a book called Overcoming Worldliness, and it's tackling certain issues that are prevalent both in the church and in the world, and trying to get the biblical answers to things, and how should we view them, how should we respond to them, how should we act accordingly. And we've covered a lot of things, and lately, last week and then this week, we'll have one more lesson on Wednesday night, we have been covering modesty. And as we've been talking about modesty, I understand what the book is trying to do. I'm not suggesting that the book is going about it in some sort of wrong way. That's definitely not it at all, and it is certainly not that David and Dan are doing a poor job. That's not it at all either. They are doing a fantastic job. As we have talked about modesty and what it's done is it's also brought up in my mind some other things that we've been studying in Overcoming Worldliness, is that there is a key. For those of us who have been in the class, we've mentioned it here and there, but what I wanted us to do was take our time to talk about this in unequivocal terms here, but that the key to understanding modesty as the book is trying to portray it, and it's coming up in the verses that we are to be reading, but we haven't really had a chance to quite get into a very deep discussion about it, is the heart. Again, we've talked about this, but I want us to specifically look at 1 Peter 3 verses 1 through 12. And thank you, David. You said that you were going to talk about this, and then you left it for me tonight. I appreciate it. So we would have talked about it a little bit this morning, so I'll give David that. But here in 1 Peter chapter 3, this is one of the verses that was mentioned for us to read, and I wanted us to give it a look over through the first 12 verses, because what I want us to notice is what Peter says about the heart that is good for modesty. What heart generates a modest person who would wear modest apparel? Okay, so we start off with the first 6 verses are speaking to women. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. So, first of all, the point tonight is not to start getting into a whole word study about what submissive means. I think what we're going to learn, though, is whatever submissive means is going to be discussed later on in these verses. So, if that word stood out to you, and don't worry, we're gonna discuss it. But I want you to note here that the first place that Peter starts is about behavior. And if a wife can win their husband without a word and simply by their behavior, then surely we, and I'll use the we, both of us, men and women, that we can help others come to Christ by our behavior as well. Our behavior must be similarly chaste and respectful in terms of Christ. Does it mean that you can't have a big personality? No, that's not what we're talking about at all. What we're talking about is the behavior that fits a Christian. And then Peter goes into the next part here. Your adornment must not be merely external. Braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry and putting on dresses. Right? This is part of adorning yourself, but it's not the focus. But let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of the Lord. This phrase here, gentle and quiet spirit, again, it is not suggesting that wives or women simply need to be background. That's not the point here at all. In fact, the idea of a gentle and quiet spirit actually is a very similar phrase in Greek to the one we find in Matthew chapter 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in spirit. This is actually an extremely similar phrase, one that was considered almost synonymous with that phrase that's used to translate Jesus' words. So the idea of a gentle and quiet spirit is not to be a wallflower. It is to be someone who is humble, someone who is poor in spirit. And that idea is thus precious in the sight of God. For in this way, so now he's going to give illustration. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, that's an important part here, isn't it? They're hoping in God. How did they behave? Well, they used to adorn themselves. Obviously, he said we're not talking about clothes. So how are they adorning themselves? Being submissive to their own husbands. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham and calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So he uses Sarah as an illustration of giving Abraham respect as her husband. But notice here that he says this is how one properly adorns herself. If we are focused on what we are wearing and not about who we are, you will fail. You'll fail in the realm of modesty. Because modesty, first and foremost, comes from the heart and from behavior. And what's interesting, I love when Paul does this throughout his epistles. So now we get to see Peter do it. I love when you see either the phrase likewise or in the same way. It's very interesting. It's very similar to therefore. Okay? It is a follow-through of what you were saying before. And specifically with likewise or in the same way, what it means is what I've said before is just as applicable in this way. So what is the in the same way? Well, verse 7, you husbands, okay, so wives aren't left out, or they're not left on their own. You husbands in the same way. So that means just like I was just talking to the wives, here's what you do, husbands. Live with your wives in an understanding way, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So here we see the balance of verse 1. Wives, be submissive to your husbands. Well, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way. I was giving a couple marriage counseling, and the husband said, she keeps telling me that the way that I try to show love, that she's not really feeling it, and she's trying to tell me how she wants to be loved, but that's ridiculous, because I know how to love her. And I said, okay, let's turn to 1 Peter chapter 3, and I want you to read verse 7. And he read it, and he goes, so what? I said, read it again. And read it again. It took about the 6th or 7th time. He went, live with your wives in an understanding. Oh. That's the way sometimes husbands, the way we are. Live or dwell with your wives in an understanding way. This idea of someone weaker is actually the idea of fragile and precious. It's something that we are handling with care. And I also want to point out that while wives are called to be submissive to their husbands, husbands, what are you called? To show her honor. Honor is not bestowed to lessers. It is not for hire to show honor to lessers. Honor is to be given to our betters. And so or at the very least, our equals. And so what husbands are called to here is to show her honor. And there's a reason. The reason is she is her own person in Christ. Right? She is a fellow heir of the grace of life. She's not that way because she's married to you. She's that way because she has her own relationship with Christ. And so it's up to us to remember that it is for us to cultivate and to encourage her relationship with Christ. Remember that she is a fellow heir of the grace of life. And then he points out to the men, so that your prayers will not be hindered. There was a lot said to the women, and there's one verse said to the men, and I'm going to encourage you men, what Peter said here has a greater weight. It is a higher level of responsibility. Because this will impact our relationship with God. I could say the same for those first 6 verses for the wives. But as leaders of our families and as leaders of the church, if our prayers are hindered, that is a great disservice to others and not just to ourselves and our families. And so, husbands, this is how you have a modest heart, or at least one of the ways you can have a modest heart. The New Testament has more than just what Peter says. But this is how husbands show their modest heart. But the interesting thing is, it doesn't stop there. Peter is going to take this a little bit further for us. So here in verses 8 through 12, to sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. There it is again. Not returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. For you were called for the very purpose that you might inherit a blessing. For the one who desires life, to love and see good days, must keep his tongue from evil and his lips from speaking deceit. He must turn away from evil and do good. He must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are toward the righteous, and his ears attend to their prayer. Remember, he just said, so your prayers aren't hindered? But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil. So notice, he's not ready to sum up his whole message yet. So what's he summing up? Because we have a whole lot left. We have all the way through the end of chapter 5. So what's he summing up? Well, I will offer to you, he is summing up the first 7 verses. But what he's doing is he's saying, look, this isn't, I said wives and I said husbands, but guess what? It's all of you. This is for all of the church. To sum up, all of you, how does a church have a modest heart? Well, harmony is the first thing given here. Harmony cannot exist unless one is putting themselves below others. When it is a contest of spiritual limbo, and I mean the fun game, not the Catholic sad doctrine, what we find is we find a greater togetherness. The next is sympathetic. The idea that I can understand where someone is coming from. This is not the same as empathetic. Empathetic means I've been there before. Sympathetic is I can imagine what you're feeling. It is putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, though I may not have ever been there before. The next is brotherly, the idea of reminding us that we are a family. Yeah, families don't always get along, but when we say that, let's not make that an excuse to not have better brotherly love. When we talk about being a family, yes, families might have their issues, but a real family, a good family, those issues are resolved quickly and with little bloodshed. The next is kind-hearted. The idea that kindness is to rule the day, not the returning of evil for evil, which is the beginning of verse 9. That is the opposite of kind-hearted. And then the humble in spirit goes back to what we were talking about with the wives. But it's for all of us to be humble in spirit. And where do you think Peter got that from? Couldn't have been Matthew chapter 5, verse 3, could it? And then in verse 9, when he gives a couple of negatives here, really one, not returning evil for evil or insult for insult. They sinned against me, and so I am going to return the favor. That is not harmony, sympathy, brotherliness, kindness, or humility. All of those things must be thrown out the window in order to return evil for evil and insult for insult. But it's also, as Jesus pointed out in the parable of the demon who leaves and cannot find another host and brings its friends, and now the last state is worse than the first. Here, Peter uses that same concept. Instead of just giving us a knot, he gives us something to focus on, something to fill the house with. It's not just not returning evil for evil, but giving a blessing. Even when we are sinned against, the natural thing out of my mouth should be blessing. And notice that I bless because I was blessed. I take the sins that others commit against me on the chin because that's what Jesus did for us. He didn't just take it on the chin, he took it to the cross. And if he was willing to go that far, I should be willing to put myself aside to bless instead of curse. And Jesus said that's what we should even do for our enemies. What better should we do for our brothers and sisters in Christ? And then some quotations here. When one desires life, love, and good days, one must keep their speech under control. One must turn away from evil and do good. We have to seek peace. Peace is not something that comes to us. Peace is something that is pursued. Peace is something that is worked for. And all of this is because as the righteous God will hear. If we as a church refuse to do these things that Peter has given for us to do, then God will no longer hear us. His ears will not attend to our prayers. Our prayers will be hindered. Why? Because the face of the Lord is against us. And so this is how a church has a modest heart. And so if all of us, men as husbands, women as wives, or all of us married or not, if all of this applies to us as a whole, then surely we should take it seriously. I think sometimes it's very easy to see the words wives and husbands and think, especially for the unmarried, well, that's for them. No. Just like when we see descriptions of who elders are supposed to be in 1 Timothy 3, that still gives you the responsibility to act accordingly. If that's the way that God expects the best of his congregation to be, then surely that is something for you to strive for. So even though we could have said wives and husbands and left it at that, and everyone could have still come from something, Peter doesn't let us leave it there. He tells us as a church how we are to behave. And thus the concept of modesty will not be difficult for us to achieve together. Whether we're talking about modest apparel or modest behavior, that will end up being easy when we are acting together as a church. And when we are acting together as a good family should. So, what are some takeaways for you? Well, how you adorn yourself is more than what you pulled out of your closet. Now, modesty starts in the heart. It doesn't end there, as we are discussing in our Bible class material. It doesn't end in the heart, but it does start in the heart. And modesty, as we have been saying, I appreciate the conversations I've had with Dan after he taught Sunday and Wednesday of last week. He said, I'm trying really hard to point out that it's both men and women. I said, you're doing a good job. But let us not forget that it is for men and women. And if adornment is not merely outward, then churches adorn themselves. And if it's true that it's not just the clothes that we put on, our adornment is more than just what our building looks like. I've been in lots of churches that look like they were built in the 1700s and never changed. Does that mean that the church is not who they need to be? By no means. What we need is a modest church. A modest church attracts the attention of those who are spiritually minded. When one decides as a church to be garish, when we think about how immodest apparel for a person plays out in modest apparel for a church, then surely we can look at the world and see the immodesty of those churches in the way that they have adorned themselves, both outwardly and inwardly, because they have decided not to be a modest church. And so, lastly, the most important takeaway for you tonight, you can show your modest heart by making your life right with God. You could be a child of His. You can say, it is time for me to put the immodesty of a life lived without God behind me, that I can put on Christ. There can be nothing more modest than wearing Christ. Is that what you're ready to do? I hope so. We're going to be singing Where the Soul Never Dies. That's where we're looking to. I mentioned this morning about delayed gratification. That is our delayed gratification, is to go where the soul never dies. But if you are not wearing Christ, if you're not modestly putting on what Peter has said we should be wearing as spiritual souls, then you'll never make it. So make the right choice tonight. While we sing this song, make your life right with Him by either becoming a Christian or coming back to the Lord. Make whatever opportunity you need, make it so as we stand and as we sing.
To Canaan's land I'm on my way, where the soul never dies. My darkest night will